Today we are going to be adding and subtracting real numbers. And so we're going to go over some vocabulary first to talk about what real numbers are. And real numbers consist of rational numbers and irrational numbers. And so basically what a rational number is a number we can understand. It's a number that we can make into a fraction. And so an example of a rational number would be like 1/2, or we could have 3/4. But you don't need to see it in this fraction form. It could even be a mixed number like 1 2/3, but it could also be a number like 3. And 3 gives us another type of example of a number. So we've got fractions. You could write these as decimals too, so it could be like 1 2/3 is 1.6 repeated, so that's okay. So it could be a repeating decimal. It could even be a terminating decimal, like 1/2 is just 0.5. Well, as I said before, 3, we have another designation of that number, and that is called an integer. And so we have rational numbers, these fractions, but then we also have these numbers that we call integers. So it's within this rational range. And so I'm going to put a box around these numbers that I'm going to make here. And these are all different rational numbers. So we've got these fractions, got these repeating decimals, these terminating decimals, and we have these things we call integers. So 3 or -3 or 2, those are all integers. And so an integer is just a number that is either positive or negative that doesn't have a decimal attached to it. So it's just a number that you would see on a number line. So those are integers. And then we also have another type of number that we can even be more specific. And so this includes all the integers. And so I'm going to put a circle here. And these are called whole numbers. And a whole number is just a positive integer. So a whole number would be like the number 4. That's a positive integer. It could also be 0. 0 is an integer. It's neither positive or negative, but it is an integer. It's a number on a number line. So those are whole numbers. And then we even have a smaller designation of numbers. And these numbers we call natural numbers. So natural just means counting numbers. And so our natural numbers would just be like 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll just put the number 1 since I'm kind of running out of room there. But it includes all those other numbers. So these are all different numbers that are rational. Now we have this other type of real number, these irrational ones. And so irrational numbers are numbers that we don't understand. That's why the IR is in there, for not rational. And so that we don't understand, we can't conceptualize them as well because they don't form a fraction. They cannot make a fraction. For instance, pi, that's an irrational number. Another one was the square root of 2. That's another irrational number. Even negative square roots of 8 is a irrational number. So these are all numbers that we can't write as a fraction. Well, we have a couple other words that we want to go over. Opposite. Opposite is numbers that are equal distance from 0 on a number line. For instance, if I had the number 3, the opposite of 3 is -3. Those are opposite one another on the number line. And the number 4, the opposite of that would be -4. So those are opposites. And then we also have this additive inverse. Additive inverse is a property, a number property that we talk about. And we use this term when we're subtracting numbers. And here's an example of this. The additive inverse, 3 plus -3 equals 0. So that is an additive inverse. When we're adding opposites, they equal 0. And that's a rule every single time. 5 plus -5 equals 0. -6 plus +6 equals 0. That's the additive inverse. Now, absolute value, another common term that we use in math. So this is the distance from a number to 0 on a number line. So, for instance, 3. The distance from 3 to 0, here's 0, here's 3, here's 2 and 1. The different distance between those two numbers from 3 to 0 equals 3. Well, the absolute value of -3, got to go on the other side of 0 to get to -3, is the same exact distance. Notice the distance between 0 and 3 is the same as 0 and -3. And so those absolute values are the same as well. So absolute value is the distance between those numbers. Well, let's take a look at some problems that you'll end up seeing on tonight's homework, and these are ones that you're adding or subtracting. So rules that we want to remember when we're adding are if they are the same sign you want to add. Opposite signs, there's a key word that we talked about. Remember, that was one of those words that I wrote up here. Showed you some opposites. Opposite signs, you're going to end up wanting to subtract. So here we have opposite signs. So we want to subtract these two numbers. So when I subtract 11 from 19, I end up at 8. And now I have to figure out whether it's positive or negative. Well, since there's more positives here, that means that the number is going to end up being positive, positive 8. If it were more negatives, if 19 was negative and 11 was positive, then it would be a negative 8. But for right now, it's just 8. So you can write that as plus 8, or you just write it as 8. It means the same thing. Here we have the same sign. So this means that we're going further in the negative direction. We're adding negative 3/4 to a negative 4 and 3/4. And so we're going to go ahead and add these two numbers. Now when we're adding, we want to add these whole numbers together, and this gives me negative 7. And then if I was to add 3/4 and 3/4, that would give me 6/4. Well, I've got to reduce that. Now I got that because I added the numerators. So you add the numerators when we're adding fractions. 3 and 3 made the 6. Keep the denominator the same. Well, I need to reduce this fraction a little bit, so let me go ahead and do that. So that's the same thing as negative 7 and 3/2. Well, that's still not quite a proper fraction. I reduced it by taking out a common factor of 2 from each of these terms. But I need to go ahead and change this to a mixed number. Well, 3/2, how many times does 2 go into 3? Well, it goes 1 time. So mixed numbers are basically a whole number and a fraction. And so here we have negative 7 plus negative 1, and what's left over? 1/2. Because 2 goes into 3 1 time with 1 left over. So when I add these numbers together, that gives me negative 8.5. And that would be the answer. Looking at our next one here, we've got a positive number and a negative. So we're going to end up subtracting. Now when I subtract, you always want to put the bigger number on top. Make sure you do any borrowing you need to do. No borrowing in this case here. And so when I do that subtraction here, I have 3. Notice how I lined up the decimals when I subtract decimals. And I have 7 minus 5 is 2. Now what is this? Is this a positive or a negative? Well, it's a negative because notice that the negative number, the absolute value of the negative number, is bigger than the absolute value of the smaller. So absolute value is larger here. And so that's why we're going to go with the negative 2 3/10. Subtraction, the rule is that we are going to add the opposite. So we're going to change it to an addition problem. So let's go ahead and do that. So 23, keep that number the same, but we're going to add, and then 36 is a positive 36. I'm going to change it to a negative 36. Notice subtraction to addition, next number to its opposite. So now they're opposite signs, so I subtract. And so when I end up doing that, it leaves me with 13. And is it positive or negative? Well, negative because there's more negatives than positives. Same thing here. We're going to keep the first number the same, change subtraction to addition, next number to its opposite. Notice how both signs are the same, so we're going to add these two numbers together. Line up the decimals when you do it. You get 7/10 and a negative 12. Negative because we're keeping the sign the same when you add numbers together that are the same sign. And the next one here, we're going to change this, keep the first number the same, change the subtraction to addition, next number to its opposite. So it was negative 2 4/5, now it's positive. So we have opposite signs, so we need to subtract. So when I take away the 1/5 from the 4/5, that leaves me with 3/5. When I take away the 1 from the 2, that leaves me with 1. So 1 3/5. Positive because there's more positives than negatives. Well, here we have a problem in which we read the problem, and it says that the Dow Jones closed down. What does down mean? Well, is that a positive or a negative number, do you think? Well, it's a negative because down signifies or symbolizes that we're going in the negative direction. And on Tuesday, we ended up going down 507 99 hundredths. And they want to find the total decrease. So this is the problem. So we are taking away this 507 99 hundredths from the 108 and 35 hundredths. And so when we do this, we are going to add the opposites. Now watch what happens. So it's negative 108 and 35 hundredths. Add the opposites. So negative 507 and 99 hundredths. And so when you do this, you just have to line up the decimals. So 507.99. We got the 108.35. And then we add these numbers together. So it's a 9 here, so this makes 14. Carry a 1 makes 12, and 1 makes 13. Bring down that decimal, and that makes 15, and 1 makes 16. And that makes 1, and you have your 6. So 616 and 34 hundredths. So the next set of directions asks us to evaluate. Evaluate means we want to substitute a number, a value of n, into an expression. That's what the expression is here, n plus negative 5. So we're going to take this value right here, this 5 and 75 hundredths, and put it in for that n right there. So when we do that, 5 and 75 hundredths plus negative 5. Notice how the negative 5 is going to take away from this positive 5, and we're just left with the 75 hundredths. And that would be our answer there. The next one here, we've got a negative 7 and 2/5. We need to substitute in place of that n. It's giving us the same expression, just different values of n. So negative 7 and 2/5, and then plus negative 5. Notice both signs are the same, so you're going to end up adding. So negative 12 and 2/5. So those are some problems that you'll see on tonight's homework. Good luck.